Before neighborhoods went quiet, families gathered for traditions that made the whole community feel connected. If you were born in the 1950s, some of your strongest memories may belong not to one house, but to the spaces between many houses. A ball field, church basement, town park, firehouse lot, or neighborhood street could become the place where people repeatedly saw the same familiar faces. These gatherings were never identical across America, and no single tradition belonged to every town, suburb, city block, or rural community. But together, they reveal something important about mid-century neighborhood life. People often met through recurring local rituals rather than scheduled digital communication. Parents talked while children moved between groups. Older residents watched from folding chairs, and local volunteers handled the small jobs that kept events running. Some traditions were civic, some religious, some seasonal, and others were simply practical ways to raise money or welcome newcomers. The details changed by region, race, religion, class, and access, yet the basic pattern was recognizable. Community life happened face to face. Here are 15 neighborhood gatherings and traditions that many Americans born in the 1950s may still remember. 1. The Welcome Wagon and greeting new families. Moving into a new neighborhood could once bring a knock from someone whose entire purpose was to help a newcomer understand the community. Welcome Wagon, founded in 1928, became one well-known version of that ritual, using local hostesses who visited newly arrived households. A hostess might arrive carrying a basket filled with small gifts, coupons, business information, and introductions to nearby services. The visit was partly commercial, but it also gave a new family a quick map of the social world outside the front door. Where was the nearest drugstore, dry cleaner, church, bank, or grocery? Which local groups met nearby? Those details helped newcomers settle in. A local hostess could quickly become the first familiar face a newcomer associated with the neighborhood. Still, the idea that a new household should be noticed and introduced says something about how visible moving day once could be. Boxes on the porch and unfamiliar children nearby were enough to make neighbors realize someone new had arrived. The greeting could turn a strange block into a place with names, routines, and recognizable faces much faster than a printed directory ever could. For many mid-century families, belonging to a neighborhood began with someone making the first introduction. 2. Multifamily neighborhood potlucks and shared suppers. A neighborhood supper did not need a restaurant reservation, matching furniture, or even enough chairs for everyone who showed up. Families carried dishes across lawns and driveways, often in glass Pyrex casseroles covered with towels to keep them warm. Folding aluminum tables could be pushed together, while card tables, lawn chairs, and whatever extra seating was available filled the gaps. The food varied by region and family background, which was part of what made a shared supper feel larger than an ordinary meal. One household might bring baked beans, another a casserole, another sliced tomatoes, rolls, gelatin salad, pie, or a bowl of something homemade. The point was not the charcoal grill itself or any particular recipe, but the fact that several households contributed to one evening. Adults lingered over plates while conversations moved from weather and school news to local gossip, repairs, sports, and family updates. Children often ate quickly and disappeared toward the yard, sidewalk, or open space, while the adults remained around the tables. No invitation software was required. Sometimes a few phone calls or a conversation over a fence was enough to get things started. The meal worked because the neighborhood itself supplied the guest list, the food, the furniture, and most of the entertainment. 3. Little League nights as a community gathering spot. By the 1950s, Little League fields were becoming more than places where children played baseball. In many communities, they became regular social meeting points. Little League grew from 776 programs in 1951 to more than 5,000 leagues by 1959, spreading the ritual across the country. On game nights, parents, grandparents, siblings, neighbors, coaches, and volunteers gathered around simple fields that often sat close to residential areas. The bleachers were as important socially as the diamond, because the same adults saw one another several evenings a week. People followed not only their own child, but the families, coaches, sponsors, and familiar players connected to the league. Local businesses often sponsored teams, adding another layer of community identity to uniforms, scoreboards, and conversations around the field. The organized baseball opportunities of that era were not equally open to everyone, especially girls, and local access also reflected broader inequalities. Even with those limits, the ball field became a powerful community hub in many towns and suburbs during the childhood years of this cohort. A summer evening could be measured by the crack of a bat, the scrape of cleats, and voices drifting from the stands. For many families, going to the game meant seeing the neighborhood almost as much as watching baseball. 4. Local church suppers, fish fries, and pancake breakfasts. In many American communities, religious congregations provided some of the most dependable places for people to gather beyond their immediate households. The exact tradition depended heavily on region and denomination. A church supper in one place, a fish fry in another, or a pancake breakfast elsewhere. A Friday fish fry, pancake breakfast, or church supper could become a recurring date on the local social calendar. Long tables in fellowship halls, parish basements, school gyms, or churchyards turned a religious property into a broader neighborhood meeting place. Volunteers cooked, served, cleared plates, sold tickets, poured coffee, and handled the small tasks that made a large meal possible. The menu mattered less than the repeated ritual of arriving, finding familiar people, and sitting down among several generations at once. Children learned which adults always worked the kitchen, which families arrived early, and which older neighbors seemed to know everyone in the room. In some regions, Friday fish fries became especially recognizable. Elsewhere, breakfasts, spaghetti suppers, or seasonal dinners filled the same social role. These gatherings also raised money for congregations, local causes, repairs, missions, or community projects without feeling like formal fundraising campaigns. For families who participated, the meal was both an event and a recurring reminder that community could be built around shared tables. 5. Neighborhood 4th of July parades, decorated bikes, and sparklers. The 4th of July could turn an ordinary neighborhood street into a small parade route long before anyone drove to a major fireworks show. Children decorated bicycles with red, white, and blue crepe paper, streamers, flags, and anything else that could survive a slow ride down the block. Some communities organized simple processions with wagons, tricycles, veterans, scout groups, local clubs, or a fire truck leading the way. The scale was often modest, which was exactly why the event could feel personal. The people watching were also the people participating. Adults stood along curbs, talked across driveways, took snapshots, and tried to keep decorations from falling into bicycle spokes. Later in the day, sparklers and small backyard fireworks might appear where local rules and family customs allowed them. This was a different memory from the enormous national bicentennial celebrations of 1976. For this cohort, the earlier ritual belonged to childhood streets. Decorated bicycles, wagons, and tricycles gave the procession its homemade neighborhood character. The holiday mixed patriotism with something more immediate, a reason for families who lived close together to come outside at the same time. For a child, the parade route might have been only a few blocks long, yet it could feel like the center of town. 6. Summer weekends at the local community pool. In many post-war suburbs and towns, the local pool became one of the most concentrated social spaces of summer. Families returned to the same place week after week, so lifeguards, parents, teenagers, and younger children became part of a familiar seasonal cast. Towels hung over fences, transistor radios played nearby, and adults talked from deck chairs while children moved between the shallow and deep ends. For those who had access, the pool could function almost like a summer town square, especially on hot weekends. Access to those pools was shaped by segregation and restrictive membership practices that divided many American communities. Some Black communities built or supported their own recreation spaces, while civil rights campaigns challenged exclusion at public facilities in many cities. Private suburban swim clubs also expanded during this period, and some used membership rules that excluded Black families. That history matters because the same institution could represent easy summer belonging to one family and unfair exclusion to another. Still, where a pool served as an accessible neighborhood hub, it gathered people repeatedly in a way few other summer places could match. The memory was not only swimming, it was knowing who would probably be there before you even arrived. 7. Volunteer fire department carnivals and parish festivals. In many small towns, suburbs, and ethnic neighborhoods, the biggest local event of summer might appear in a firehouse lot, church grounds, or parish field. Volunteer fire departments and religious organizations often depended on fundraising events, and carnivals or festivals could turn that need into a community celebration. Strings of lights, temporary booths, simple rides, cake wheels, food stands, raffles, and folding tables transformed familiar property for a few nights. In some places, the sound of a firehouse siren or the arrival of carnival equipment signaled that the event was about to begin. Parents met neighbors near the food stands, while children watched rides, games, or prize counters that seemed enormous under evening lights. Parish festivals carried strong regional and religious differences, while volunteer fire carnivals were especially familiar in many smaller communities. Local institutions supplied the volunteers, grounds, food stands, and reason for everyone to gather in one place. The volunteers were often people residents already knew from work, school, church, local stores, or the same streets they lived on. That familiarity made the event feel less like commercial entertainment and more like the community temporarily building its own fairground. For many families, the annual return of the carnival or festival became part of the calendar as surely as the changing season. 8. Community picnics in the local park. A local park could become a banquet room without walls when a civic group, church, veterans organization, workplace group, or neighborhood association planned a picnic. Picnic tables filled early, blankets spread across grass, and coolers or metal drink containers appeared beside baskets of food. The gathering might include softball, horseshoes, simple contests, children's games, music, speeches, or nothing more organized than a long afternoon together. Groups such as the Lions, VFW, churches, unions, or local clubs sometimes sponsored these events, depending on the character of the community. Generations shared the same space without the formality of a scheduled meeting. Adults who normally saw one another briefly could sit and talk for an hour, while children moved between tables and open grass. In smaller towns, a park picnic might pull together families from several nearby streets rather than one single block. In cities, a church, ethnic association, or neighborhood organization could create the same feeling inside a larger urban environment. The tradition worked because parks were neutral ground. No household had to host everyone, yet the gatherings still felt local and familiar. By the end of the day, paper plates, tired children, folded blankets, and long goodbyes marked the slow return to ordinary routines. 9. Neighborhood garage and rummage sales. Garage and rummage sales fit the mid-century neighborhood because they combined household turnover, bargain hunting, fundraising, and face-to-face conversation. Rummage sales were already a familiar fundraising tradition for churches, auxiliaries, clubs, and other community organizations during the 1950s and 1960s. At home-based sales, folding tables and open garages displayed dishes, toys, clothing, tools, books, lamps, and objects a family no longer needed. Hand-lettered cardboard signs on telephone poles or at intersections pointed strangers and neighbors toward the sale. The event was partly commercial, but the prices were small enough that conversation and curiosity often mattered as much as the transaction. People compared stories about old objects, asked who was moving, and learned which family had finally cleaned out a basement or attic. At church and civic rummage sales, volunteers sorted donated goods together for days before the public ever arrived. That work turned secondhand selling into a social project, with proceeds often supporting a congregation, auxiliary, charity, or local cause. Garage and yard sales would become even more visible later, but their roots fit naturally into the growing home ownership culture of the 1950s and 1960s. For a neighborhood, a sale could make one driveway unusually busy and give people another reason to stop, browse, and talk. 10. Bake sales and local fundraisers. A folding table covered with homemade cakes, cookies, pies, brownies, or bread could become a tiny fundraising headquarters outside a familiar local place. Bake sales appeared through churches, clubs, scout groups, auxiliaries, parent organizations, and charities, often wherever residents already passed during the week. Depending on the community, the table might sit near a grocery store, church hall, civic event, or other high-traffic gathering place. The money raised could be modest, but so were many local needs. Uniforms, equipment, repairs, trips, charity drives, or supplies. Fundraising happened in public, with familiar volunteers asking familiar neighbors to support something close to home. Recipes carried family reputations, and regular buyers sometimes knew exactly whose pie, cake, or cookies they hoped to find. Older children might help hold signs or make change, while adults handled the table and talked to nearly everyone who stopped. The exchange was simple. Buy something small, support a local cause, and spend a few minutes catching up. Before online campaigns and digital payment links, the fundraiser itself had to appear somewhere people physically gathered. That made even a small bake sale another piece of neighborhood social infrastructure. 11. Local civic clubs and community projects. Mid-century community life often included organizations whose names seemed to appear on signs, parade banners, ball fields, meeting notices, and fundraising posters. Lions clubs, Rotary clubs, VFW posts, American Legion posts, and other civic organizations vary greatly by town and region. Even families outside the membership knew the club names from sponsored teams, parade banners, fundraising signs, and community projects. A club might sponsor a picnic, maintain a local facility, support a youth program, raise money for equipment, or organize a public event. Members wearing matching hats, vests, pins, or jackets could become familiar figures at parades, fairs, and community ceremonies. These groups provided a structure for adults who wanted to do something local together beyond work, home, or religious life. They also connected business owners, veterans, tradespeople, professionals, and other residents who might otherwise meet only casually. Club names appeared on ball field signs, parade banners, donation plaques, and printed programs around town. Even so, their public projects helped shape the visible calendar of many American communities during the 1950s and 1960s. A child might not know what happened at the meetings, but could easily recognize the club name attached to the event. 12. Spring cleanup drives and beautification weekends. Long before modern homeowners associations became the default explanation for neighborhood rules, many communities organized voluntary cleanup and beautification drives. Mid-century newspapers, civic groups, towns, and neighborhood organizations promoted spring campaigns built around painting, clearing debris, planting, mowing, and improving shared areas. Some campaigns used cheerful slogans, contests, signs, or civic pride to persuade residents to spend a weekend working outdoors. The activity could involve alleys, vacant edges, roadside areas, public spaces, or simply a coordinated push to improve several properties at once. This should not be confused with one neighbor doing another person's chores, which was a different kind of relationship. The tradition here was collective, a visible campaign that made improvement itself into a temporary community event. Local clubs, youth groups, municipal departments, newspapers, or neighborhood organizations might provide tools, publicity, trucks, or places to haul debris. A Saturday cleanup might end with brush piled at the curb, fresh paint on a fence, and a cleared vacant edge. Still, archival records from the 1950s show that organized cleanup drives were very much a part of mid-century civic culture. For residents who joined in, the reward was immediate. By Sunday evening, a familiar street or public space looked noticeably different. 13. Local Memorial Day and Labor Day parades. National holidays often became intensely local when a parade came down the main street, past the park, or through a familiar neighborhood route. Memorial Day processions might include veterans, school bands, scout troops, civic organizations, fire departments, flags, and ceremonies at a cemetery or monument. Labor Day parades were especially important in communities with strong union traditions, industrial employment, or long-established labor organizations. The same parade route could fill with veterans, union members, fire crews, bands, and neighbors who recognized half the procession. But where these parades were established traditions, families often knew the route, the viewing spots, and the organizations that would appear. Children recognized uniforms and banners, while adults spotted coworkers, relatives, veterans, union members, or local officials in the procession. The parade connected national identity to people who actually lived nearby, which made the ceremony feel less abstract. A band turning a corner, a fire engine moving slowly, and flags lining a street could temporarily reorganize the whole center of town. Afterward, people might continue toward a picnic, ceremony, ball game, or family gathering, rather than simply returning home. For many communities, these holiday parades were recurring public reunions as much as formal commemorations. 14. Halloween trick-or-treating, when the whole block participated. Trick-or-treating expanded rapidly after World War II and became especially well-suited to the growing suburban neighborhoods of the 1950s. By the 1950s and 1960s, candy was becoming a more central Halloween treat, although homemade cookies, popcorn balls, coins, fruit, and other handouts still appeared. The ritual depended on participation from both sides of the door. Children made the rounds, while adults prepared for a steady stream of neighborhood visitors. Families often recognized costumes, voices, siblings, and parents, turning each stop into a short social exchange rather than an anonymous transaction. Some adults walked with younger children, others stayed near home, and neighbors compared how many trick-or-treaters had already passed. The night temporarily connected houses that might otherwise have had little reason for everyone to visit at once. This is why Halloween belongs in a community story rather than only a childhood story. Adults made the entire neighborhood ritual possible. The tradition also changed over time, and the trust surrounding homemade treats would decline sharply in later decades. For this cohort, however, the classic door-to-door pattern grew during exactly the years when many were young enough to remember it intensely. On that one evening, the whole block could feel like a single event, with dozens of front doors. 15. Christmas caroling around the neighborhood. In some communities, December brought another tradition that required no stage, ticket, or formal venue. Groups simply walked the neighborhood singing. By early evening, a small group might gather at one house, choose the first song, and start down the block together. Church groups, youth organizations, school friends, families, or informal clusters of neighbors might move from house to house after dark. Winter coats, flashlights, song sheets, and the glow from decorated houses created a very different neighborhood atmosphere from summer gatherings. Older residents or families known to the singers might receive special stops, while other households opened doors simply to listen for a few minutes. The performance itself did not have to be polished. Participation and recognition mattered more than musical quality. People who rarely entered one another's homes could still share a brief holiday moment at the doorway or along the walk. Because the tradition was visible and audible, even households that did not participate could hear a group approaching from farther down the street. For those who remember it, caroling captures a kind of neighborhood celebration that depended entirely on people being physically present together. It also makes a fitting final tradition. Voices moving from house to house, turning separate homes into one temporary community. These traditions were never one single American experience, and memory becomes more accurate when we leave room for the differences between communities. A suburban pool could welcome one family while excluding another. A church festival could be central in one town and absent elsewhere. Yet across those differences, the 15 traditions share one pattern. Community life required people to repeatedly show up in the same local places. They saw one another at ball fields, parks, church halls, parade routes, fundraisers, firehouse lots, doorways, and neighborhood streets. Familiarity grew through repetition, not because every neighbor was a close friend or because the past was free of conflict. People simply had more recurring reasons to be physically present around those who lived nearby. That is why a small detail, a Pyrex dish, a cardboard sale sign, a decorated bicycle, or a folding table can unlock such a large memory. The object points back to an event. The event points back to people. And the people bring an old neighborhood back into focus. If one of these traditions belonged to your community, the most interesting part may be the local version that was different from everyone else's. Because in the end, neighborhoods were remembered not only for where people lived, but for the occasions that brought them together.